Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. This is your host, Matt Kirkner. We are on location in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, more specifically at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's Connected Systems Institute, where we are learning about all kinds of advanced manufacturing technology. We're actually at the 5G Summit, so we've been spending the last several hours listening to people that are in the middle of studying and deploying 5G technology and advanced manufacturing. If that isn't completely familiar to our listeners, it will be by the time we are done. But let me begin by introducing three phenomenal guests. The first one is Atish Sinha. Atish is the academic director of the Connected Systems Institute here at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Our second guest is someone who's actually familiar to many of our listeners because he joined us, I should say, almost a year ago from Automation Fair, Rockwell's Automation Fair in Chicago, Illinois. That's James Rose. And James is the senior manager of private cellular networks for US Cellular. And we're looking forward to getting some updates on some of the great things that we heard from him last year. And our final guest is Murrell Haslam, who is the Director of Technical Sales Support, Business Area Enterprise Wireless Solutions for Ericsson. So all three of you, welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast. It is awesome to have you on with us.
Thanks for having me.
Hi.
Yeah, fantastic. We're going to start with you, Atish, because you are the individual here at the Connected Systems Institute. You are the man of the hour, the man of the evening. You even spent some time moderating a panel this evening and did a phenomenal job with that, talking to some of the folks that are with us here this afternoon, or this evening, I should say. And so let's start out with this. I know what the Connected Systems Institute is. Our guests certainly do as well. But for our listeners who may not be completely familiar with the amazing things that you're doing here, tell us all about CSI.
Yeah, the Connected Systems Institute is a collaborative workspace to facilitate different activities, including research, education, and collaboration in the space of Industry 4.0 technologies. It has an advanced manufacturing testbed, an industrial data center, teaching labs focusing on industrial automation, simulation, digital twins, networking, and cybersecurity, and work areas that you see here for students and industrial partners that are involved in research. So in a connected system, the concept of industrial IoT is integrated with business enterprise functions, including manufacturing execution systems. We have Plex here, enterprise resource planning like SAP, supply chain management, HR, and customer relations to create a single system from suppliers to customers. In partnership with several private companies, CSI is developing new ways to integrate digital technologies such as AI, machine learning, robotics, AR, 5G into the manufacturing testbed.
Those are all the technologies, Atish, that we talk about here day in and day out. Artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, applications of 5G networks. We're going to get into that in even more detail. And to your point, the three things that are happening here, and they're all really important. Education is part of it, right? So you've got students that are actively using this space as they pursue a wide variety of different areas of study. So it's not just necessarily engineers, as I know from the history of the CSI. You've got students coming from all different disciplines and collaborating here. You also talk about the application. So you're partnering with all these great manufacturing technologies and purveyor of IIoT and Industry 4.0 technologies to put those to work here and actually see how they function in a test arena before you put them to work out in the actual manufacturing environment. And finally, that research aspect of it, which is really doing some high-end research into IIoT and advanced manufacturing here at the CSI. So lots of energy here, lots of things going on. The place was absolutely full all evening long. And the reason that we're here is one of those specific technologies, that being 5G and private cellular networks. This is perhaps a little bit new to some of our listeners, but tell us a little bit about why this area is so important to the CSI and why you decided to advance the work that you're doing into 5G and private cellular networks.
CSI's vision is to serve as a trusted resource for technology, research, collaboration, education, thought leadership, and industrial community outreach. with a focus on emerging industrial IoT technologies. Now, 5G is an emerging IoT technology, and it fits in very nicely with the technology stack we have at CSI.
And when we say emerging, it is genuinely emerging. In other words, we're just starting to see the use cases. We're just starting to see the examples of people using this technology. And on that topic, I want to turn our attention here now to James Rhodes. James, first, welcome back to the Tech Ed Podcast. Awesome to have you with us. And so I want you to give us a little bit of a sense for how this technology is being deployed in industry, with the understanding that, look, a lot of this is brand new. And we're here at the CSI because you're trying to find opportunities for how we can use this 5G technology in manufacturing, in advanced manufacturing. But tell us a little bit about how are manufacturers benefiting from this technology, private cellular networks, as we sit here today.
Yeah, great question. I'll give you a two-part answer. So my first part of the answer is that private cellular is now, I would say, in the early adoption stage on multiple industries. Healthcare, finance, utilities, they're all thinking about private cellular at different scales. The common theme, however, is they all have operational priorities that can't be disrupted by innovation.
Sure.
And so one of the things that is really important for US Cellular and their commitment to CSI is proving out these technologies on behalf of these industries. If you're a global player and you have a large research and development budget, by all means, you want to go into that sandbox, invest, and start playing around with 5G technology. But if you don't have that research and development budget, then you need somebody to help you remove any of those unforeseen hurdles or obstacles, and more importantly, help prove out the use cases that are ultimately going to build your business case to invest into a new technology in the first place. So that's ultimately what we're looking to do here.
Phenomenal. Now, I can see the applications for 5G in utilities. I can certainly see it in healthcare. I can see it in manufacturing. You mentioned finance. That's a little interesting to me as a closet public accountant, by the way. I would call myself a recovering accountant. So it's been a few decades now since I was in that world, but spent a lot of time in finance and still spend time around private equity and so on. So give me a sense, if you would, for what the applications are in finance. That piqued my interest.
Yeah, the first and most important one, and think about this from a sense of gaming or gamification. Mm-hmm. What do you think an active trader's most important capability is whenever they're submitting a trade? It's latency. It's having a network that reacts fast. Absolutely. And so 5G is the first technology that we've actually seen the latency act faster than the human mind can react.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a whole new application for Flash Boys where we had individuals actually taking advantage of the arbitrage that was available to them by getting data back and forth to the market faster and knowing what was happening more faster than anything else. So I can totally see if you're the person that has not just the trading faster or that trade going through more quickly, but also having access to that information in a period of time where literally nanoseconds can make a difference. That application is fascinating. We could do a whole podcast on that topic alone. Obviously, we want to stay on the topic that we're talking about here, which is the amazing applications of private cellular networks and 5G in advanced manufacturing. And specific here to the Connected Systems Institute, I want James to ask you a follow-up question on the same topic that we asked Atish, which is about this partnership and why this is so important to him. Why is this partnership so important to US Cellular, the work you're doing here at the CSI?
You know, one of the philosophies US Cellular carries with innovation is that you can't achieve effective innovation without partnership. And we take that very seriously in the sense that as a carrier, we have a great 40 plus year experience of understanding how to manage and run these networks. We don't have a wealth of experience on the integration of these networks with other existing technologies, say within enterprise IT and Wi-Fi systems. Sure. And so we can't go after just our swim lane. We have to look at the big picture. And so ultimately we're partnering with organizations like, Merle here with Ericsson, and then we need organizations like CSI to bring multiple partners together so that we can all solve these problems cohesively or entirely versus just what maybe a CSP or a carrier would care about.
It was fascinating as we were listening to some of the speakers here this evening. So many of them said exactly the same thing, which is a lot of this research that we want to do, a lot of the exploring new applications. It's really difficult in a manufacturing environment where we're trying to maintain takt time, we're trying to deliver product on time, we're trying to ensure that our lines aren't going down, we're managing uptime, all of these different things that we're managing in a manufacturing environment. Really hard to experiment, right? Because the cost of something going wrong is really, really high.
That's what we're ultimately here to do. It's to help dispel any sort of, unforeseen hurdles. But more importantly, it's to help, like with any innovation, it's to help these organizations understand how to integrate it in a way that isn't just operationally viable, but also culturally viable within their walls as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of it. When you're thinking about advancing manufacturing technology, a lot of times you can forget about that part, which is every single change that we make is going to affect an individual, affect the way they do their job, affect how they do their work. And so sometimes in as much as the technological transformation in manufacturing or any other endeavor is important, in some ways the people side of it, to your point, is just as important as well. So we have to make sure we're managing both of those, the people and the technology. On the topic of the technology, and I want to turn our attention now to Merle Haslam with Ericsson to talk about this technology, Merle, and give our listeners really an understanding and a perspective when we're talking about things like private cellular technology and private cellular networks. What even is that? Help us understand it.
So I can answer it in one sentence or in a little more depth. So let's start with the one sentence. And it's technology works by providing dedicated coverage and capacity to the number of users that you control.
Okay. You meaning the company or
as the company or the owner of that network.
Okay, got it.
So you control the access to that network, where you want the coverage, what use cases you're going to put on there, and as such you get a greater quality of service. And you do that through a network that's easy to install and operate.
Fascinating. So tell us about the network itself. So you say a network, and you just kind of use that term as if we all know exactly what that is. I
Yep.
actually I saw this evening some applications and examples, but paint the picture for our listeners. What does that network look like?
Yeah, so I'm going to sort of look at the difference between public and private networks and go through those functional blocks.
Sure.
So public cellular networks have coverage, network capacity shared amongst many subscribers. So that's how much data you can use at the same time as other people. They really decide where that coverage goes, the cellular network, and what services they put on there. And they have the license spectrum to use that. So with a private network, as we've said, you decide where the coverage goes
Mm-hmm.
and the use cases. But the functional blocks are basically the same. There's a SIM or an eSIM as a subscriber.
Okay.
Then there's a device that you put that into
Sure.
to use. That device talks to a radio, and the radios are things that you see on the side of highways, on top of buildings,
Sure.
on structures.
Okay.
At the bottom of that radio is where all the sort of radio access network compute goes. So how to hand over from one cell to another. And then that talks to the core network, which is in a data center somewhere. And then your data from there, and in the data center, it's sort of managing subscriber information, authentication, user plane, control plane data. And then the data goes probably to somewhere in the cloud where your end service is.
Got it.
Now, all of those basic components are in the
Right.
private network, but you have them on premise, all in the case of CSI,
Sure.
something the size of a dorm fridge.
Got it.
So
Wow.
a 4 to 5 U set of rack equipment. And not only is it based on premise, but you can decide if you want that user data to actually leave the premise at all.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the commercial networks are built with security in mind,
Right.
and we've talked about that a lot in various conversations,
For sure.
but even though they're built with that security, you still may not want the user data to leave. And in
Right.
some cases, it might be Department of Defense, and they have an air gap system completely.
Absolutely. Yep.
So that's really the building blocks for the private network.
Understood. And to put that into perspective, in my years of manufacturing, before everything was connected early on, where every plant was air gapped, you could protect that, your IP, your secret sauce. I mean, however you manufactured your product, whatever you didn't want anybody else on the planet to know about, you just kept it there, right? And,
Yep.
and your risk was that an employee might take that somewhere, but that was a risk you could mitigate. And in this particular case, for a while, then everything was connected. We're almost going back to that point where using technology, we're able to air gap a plant again.
Yeah, and I think the problem with having gaps for most people or not having that control is
Right.
it's truck rolls. If you have a problem with something, whether it's software, hardware, and you don't know, you need to send someone on site.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the Ericsson Private 5G, with the Cradle Point devices, they're all managed remotely so
Sure.
that you can look at problems without the truck roll. You can manage them within minutes instead of waiting.
But as
for
that
someone to
company you're
turn up.
managing who has access to that, then that's one of the huge benefits.
I think James needs to say something about managing networks, because we provide the Ericsson private 5G network, or we provide NetCloud private network to US Cellular.
And we'll give them the opportunity to do that. Before we do that, one quick, you use the term device generically, right? So if I'm a manufacturing supervisor, I'm a plant manager, I'm a VP of operations, I'm a VP of IT, what have you, what are we talking about in terms of the devices that you're connecting?
So there's a wide range. It can be just I call them UEs. I've got to stop doing that when I'm talking to people. Sort of an iPhone, or a sort of an Android device, a tablet, whether that's Android, Windows, iOS. So it could just be handheld devices, and they can get access to valuable information that's on an edge server on site, and it's as simple as that. So that's the device. You put a SIM in it, or maybe using an eSIM, that subscriber identity. But it could be IoT devices, which are either native to let's say a torque wrench in our case today,
Right.
with Atlas Copco.
Sure.
So you may have a native device within a tool, or you may have a totally separate device, which is, let's say, a cellular router, which provides Wi-Fi or Ethernet or some other connectivity to other tools or software systems. So when I say devices, anything that has a cellular radio connection.
Got it. So it could be a machine tool, it could be a conveyor, it could be an air compressor, it could be a power tool. I mean, it's really whatever technology we want to connect. So now to the question that Merle rather tried to pose to James, we'll take that back and just ask that question on the networking side, as far as somebody outside the organization having access to the data, even though it's all being protected by a private cellular network, they still have access. It's just the employer or the company that is able to control what access they have. Am I understanding that right?
You are understanding that right. And Merle, thank you for always keeping me honest. So, the way I'd answer this is I'd say, when you think about a cellular service provider, what would be the reason for a cellular service provider to enable another organization to build their own native network? Ultimately, that's a cellular service provider saying, you don't need us anymore, right? Well, first, the answer is it's the right thing to do. And we see the industry going that way. So you're either on the bus or you're off of it. Secondly, to Merle's earlier comment, we do have 40 plus years of managing and running and continuously improving / optimizing a network. It's 4G and 5G today. It's going to be 6G. It's coming. So that's a really important point. But the other thing that I think is extra special that US Cellular is going on their way to do is there's organizations that aren't just facing the subject matter expertise. They're also facing problems where they don't have access to the individuals to even train and develop. And so what we're actually doing is extending our own engineering or staff augmentation services directly to the entities that need to build in-house their own cellular engineer staffs.
Got it. And as they're building those engineer staffs, Merle, I want to ask you this question. Obviously, building that engineer staff requires us to have organizations like the CSI, like the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and others creating this next generation of talent. So kind of bringing the conversation back to the CSI, what value does Ericsson see in partnering with a teachers organization in terms of creating the future of your technology and really innovating in the space?
To me, cellular connectivity is fundamental to new use cases in Industry 4.0 and in manufacturing. In scenarios such as digitalization, automation, connected assets, and Ericsson through US Cellular, we've supplied the Ericsson private 5G at CSI Lab to enable research and innovation in areas of advanced manufacturing. And the same radio portfolio of technology that we have is used in 143 commercial 5G networks in 62 countries.
Wow.
So I think from the value that Ericsson brings, we have relationships with ecosystems. Obviously, we have a broad portfolio that can be used across different bands. But to me, I think the value is that we've taken such a complex operational software from the hands of CSPs, where they've got hundreds of tools to manage a network. And we've tried to listen to people like James to say, here's what our customers need, and provided a really basic network management portal that can be understood by someone with basic operational knowledge. And so it's taken the best of the operational tools that are available to CSPs and putting them in the hands of, let's say, an IT or an OT operator.
This is something that really excites me as it pertains to CSI as well. It's that, back when 4G was launching, wireless carriers, They knew video downloads would happen faster and more efficiently. That was about it.
Yeah.
We weren't anticipating Uber and Snapchat
Sure.
and TikTok and
Yep.
all these applications to start to come to life. So I think the thing to call out as well is that in a controlled sandbox environment with technology that's considered bleeding edge, when you have students involved with that, you're also cultivating innovation. There's a lot of Ubers out there that we haven't thought about yet in 5G, and it's going to be coming.
That's an awesome example, James. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, you sit and dream about what the future would look like, and none of us would have dreamed the world that we're living in today 5 or 10 years ago. And here you have students that are learning on the absolute most advanced technology, getting excited about it, understanding it. And Merle, I like the way that you explain that, hey, we found a way to make this as simple as possible so that we can innovate with it, which I think is really, really important. Those students are going to have experiences with your solutions, and they're not going to be here forever, right? These are people that are going to go out into the world and change the world. And as they're doing that, they're going to be doing it with technologies like US Cellular, like Ericsson and others in mind. And what a great way to just continue to push the technology to accelerate adoption. I mean, so there's just so many benefits, Atish, as we start to wrap our time up here together, to not just the CSI, and you look at what your students are going to learn, and what your faculty will learn, and so on through these partnerships, but also all your other stakeholders. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to kind of gloss over in this student to educator relationship that there's all of these other individuals and organizations that are going to benefit from the work that you're doing. So let's talk about that. Tell us how this new technology is going to benefit not just the CSI, but CSI stakeholders, and especially manufacturing companies and your students.
Our partnerships with Rockwell, with Ericsson, with US Cellular, I mean, it's really exciting because we have exposure to so many use cases now, and you heard examples of use cases at the panel, and James and Merle both have been talking about use cases like AMRs, and we can think of other use cases that student can work on. We are launching a new MS in Connected Systems Engineering next year, and one of the required courses is a capstone design project. And that is where we can use some of the use cases that James and Merle have been talking about and give them real-world experience, students real-world experience in working with 5G networks. So that will be an invaluable experience for our students. But for our other partners, who are new to 5G, this is an ideal test bed to try, break things like what some of the panelists talked about, right? Break things and try and see what happens. Exactly. And I was talking to one of the attendees after the panel was over, and he says something very interesting. One of the main problems with a manufacturing production line is downtimes, right? And he said, why can't we use 5G to see if we can reduce the downtime? Absolutely. So, see, those are use cases, and those could be used by a faculty for research proposals and things like that, right? So this is a win-win situation for us. This is an emerging technology. We can use that in our curriculum as student design projects or capstone projects. We can use that for research, and then we can use that for developing new courses as well.
Yeah, exactly. It is a proving ground. And I'm glad we had the opportunity to spend some time in the proving ground to prove some things to each other and to our audience about the great things happening here at the CSI, the great things happening among your partners, especially as it relates to 5G and to private cellular networks. I want to take this moment to thank all three of our guests, Atish Sinha, who is the academic director of the Connected Systems Institute here at UWM, James Rose on his second appearance here on the Tech Ed podcast, and I'm sure not his last, senior manager, private cellular networks for US Cellular, and finally Merle Haslam, who is the director of technical sales support, business area enterprise wireless solutions, the longest title I think in the history of the Tech Ed podcast for Ericsson. All three of you, thank you so much for being with us. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Well, what a conversation that we just had here on the Tech Ed podcast with individuals from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, US Cellular, and Ericsson, talking all about the deployment and the technology that wraps itself around private cellular networks, around 5G. And now we are going to transition to a conversation with someone who is thinking a lot about how these and other technologies are affecting the use case in the business world, both from the standpoint of integrating advanced manufacturing and, in this case, food production technology in a integration operation, and also putting that technology to work once it gets out to his customers. We're going to be talking all about that with Dave Foley, and Dave is the chief operating officer of a company we're going to learn about in just a moment called Marchant Schmidt, doing some really, really cool stuff in the area of food production and as it relates really, Dave, to advanced manufacturing. So let's just start out by welcoming you to the Tech Ed Podcast. Thank you for spending some time with us.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Start out and tell us just a little bit about what your company does.
Sure. So Marchand Schmidt is a industrial food equipment manufacturer. We design and build hygienic automation systems for the food industry. And our big market is cheese conversion. So if you buy shredded cheese or you've seen it on a pizza, good chance is that our machines did that conversion.
So not only have I seen shredded cheese, but I've actually been in a number of cheese plants, and I'm sure I've seen your technology. It's absolutely fascinating when you get into food production, and sometimes we think about all the things that happen. People don't want to see the sausage being made as one example, but the truth of the matter is that when we think about cheese conversion, whether we're shredding it, whether we're slicing it, we're walking into our neighborhood grocery store, we're grabbing into the cooler and we're buying a bag of sliced cheese, we're buying a bag of shredded cheese. Somebody had to make that, and it wasn't the farmer that created the milk, for example, that went into the cheese, or the cheesemaker. Even there's these cheese conversion companies that are actually taking huge blocks of cheese, and I've seen it, and they're converting it into what we buy in the grocery store. So if I'm understanding correctly, that's what your company does.
No, that's a great description. We help our customers take large pieces of cheese and turn them into smaller pieces
Yeah.
of cheese. And it seems real simple, but there's a lot to it.
As I mentioned, I've been in a number of cheese conversion plants, and people would be blown away if they haven't seen that at the level of automation, the level of technology, the amount of smart technology. I mean, as we think about how smart sensors and smart devices are starting to totally change the way that we monitor manufacturing, or for that matter, food production equipment, the amount of data that we can gather, the types of data we can gather. So is smart technology, smart sensors and devices, is that coming into play in your business as well?
It is. And, there's different levels of sophistication with different suppliers, right? So some are sort of at different stages of how sophisticated is their IT infrastructure, OT infrastructure. Some are already starting to adopt a lot of that. And then increasingly, where we see an opportunity is helping some of the customers that they're maybe just on the onset of that journey of smart manufacturing, smart technology for their lines, right? And obviously, the utopia for any manufacturer would be lights out
Right?
and be able to walk away. But, that might be a little further down the road, but there's a bunch of opportunities and horizons of technology that we can bring to them in addition to our machines.
So as you look out at that future, give us some example of those opportunities or horizons. How's your world going to change in the next 5 to 10 years, do you think?
It's really how we look at our business going from a machine builder to adding on these other features to starting with those solutions and then having the machines equipment just be part of that, right? So
Sure.
it's a different way that we look at things and how we present those solutions to customers because they have to appreciate it too.
Right?
And they may not be measuring things on an OEE basis. They may just be looking at things on a one basic measurement. And so
Sure.
part of what we're doing is even helping them educate some of our customers on how to get greater yields, improve quality and outputs on the machines, and how we'll help them develop those solutions to get.
And I love the way that you answered that question as we're sitting here at the Connected Systems Institute, and you were a member of a panel. We had two great panels here that we listened to, and one of the gentlemen told a story about his superior in the organization, some senior executive that came and said, "Here, you're going to deploy this new technology." And he said, well, why? What's the use case? And the answer was, the use case is you're going to keep your job. So just go deploy the technology. You and I would agree that just deploying technology for the sake of deploying technology, that is a fool's errand. I mean, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to spend a lot of money. It really is about solving problems, whether that's problems of efficiency, whether it's problems of throughput, of a quality issue. Maybe it's just being able to pull more data so that we can drive improvement in the future, or locate constraints in a manufacturing operation. So what I'm hearing is that you're partnering with your clients to do a lot of that, to figure out, all right, let's not use technology just for the sake of using technology. Let's figure out what problem we're trying to solve, how it's going to benefit you, how it's going to drive ROI, and then deploy it. Is that a lot of the conversations you end up having?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, first things first, right?
Right.
And it's one, having awareness and what is your biggest problem that you need to solve right now. And then having awareness to the technology, understanding how you would use it and apply it, right? And then is it affordable?
Right.
Is it an affordable application that you're going to get an appropriate ROI on
Yep.
to make it work, right? And so it's looking at all those factors. We saw, particularly coming out of the pandemic, a lot of demand for robotic applications, right?
Right.
Labor replacement. But I think as, some of our customers, we've learned it's not just as simple as putting a robot, taking a person out, putting a robot in.
For sure.
And you have to think through the performance of the entire line and all the other implications of putting automation like robotics in place.
Yeah, there's two ways to learn that lesson of deploying automation, and it never is easy, and it never works exactly the way you expect it will the first time. And there's a lot of things culturally and in terms of overall process that go into automating any advanced manufacturing operations. So thinking through all that ahead of time, and then to your point, making sure that your customers have awareness of what is available to them and informing them and keeping them up to speed on new technologies. One of the technologies we're talking about here this evening in a lot of detail is 5G technology, and our listeners are now very familiar with that because we just spent several minutes, or at least quite a bit of time with three subject matter experts. So as we think about 5G, and knowing that I'm not an expert on it, and I'm not expecting you to be an expert on it necessarily the technology, but the use cases, the deployment, the business case for 5G, as we think about how much faster and how much more accurately we can transmit information in a manufacturing operation. How do technologies like 5G and private cellular networks start to affect the way you think about the future of your products, Dave?
Yeah, so 5G would probably be out kind of one or two horizons. There's a few
Right?
other technology adoptions that probably come before that, but probably the best use case example is on quality inspections and an increasing use of vision and AI, which is going to be pushing a lot of data around. And to make full use of that, improved connectivity, lower latency, bandwidth is going to be critical to accommodate all that data movement.
Absolutely. Yeah. People don't necessarily understand or appreciate that in so many cases, now that we're deploying more and more smart technology, smart devices, smart sensors, they have the ability to communicate with each other. They have the ability to make their own decisions. They have embedded intelligence. The challenge with so much of that data is what do we do with it and where does it go? And we can run into really quickly a constraint in the same way we might run into a constraint on a manufacturing line. We can run into a constraint in terms of moving data around where we literally have so much data being acquired, but we can't go anywhere with it because we don't have the ability to transmit it throughout the manufacturing operation fast enough. 5G is one of those technologies that starts to drive adoption, I think, of smart technology. But we also heard from our guest today and from the panelists that we listened to, some of this technology is still a little ways off. I mean, the Connected Systems Institute exists in part to help companies test these technologies. Companies like US Cellular and Ericsson, who have been on with us, are doing exactly that here. But it really is going to take a little while, do you agree, before 5G technology and private cellular networks become ubiquitous in manufacturing? We're probably still, to your point, 5 or 10 years, maybe even more of that away. But what a fascinating time for us to be part of those conversations. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think having that awareness of what's coming, plan for it, maybe build for it, but you don't necessarily may not be in the position where you have to be prepared to adopt it immediately.
Yep, exactly. And we're all about that here on the Tech Ed podcast is let's get those great ideas. Let's get those new technologies out in front of our listeners, have them thinking about what's coming, making sure that we're doing the really, really important work of preparing that next generation of STEM and workforce talent. So when technologies like these are in fact ubiquitous in manufacturing, that they've got experiences with them here at places like the Connected Systems Institute and elsewhere. So they have knowledge and an understanding of what the future could be and what the possibilities are. And I appreciate your time, Dave, spending a little time with us thinking about that future and dreaming a little bit about where all this technology is going. You run a fascinating operation. You're part of a really, really interesting company. Can't thank you enough, Dave Foley, the Chief Operating Officer of March & Schmidt, for joining us here on the Tech Ed Podcast. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.